I think I see the thumbs up that we're ready to go with the online portion of the meeting, which I will call to order and acknowledge that we're on the traditional territories of the Skokomish Nation. We've got a very simple agenda, but it's a very significant meeting. So I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Councillor Kroll, seconded Councillor DeAndrade. All those in favor? The motion carries. And it looks like we have oh, that's just, I'm not sure if that's our new, is that an actual presentation or is that just kind of a title page for, okay, in general. I'm getting used to the new technology here. But I will turn the meeting to our Director of Finance for item 3.1, which is our preliminary general operating budget.
Good, thank you, Mayor. So I'm just going to have touch on a few areas in the report and then turn it over to the committee give you guys lots of time for discussion. And so this budget, the 2023 preliminary general operations budget, deals with, as the title suggests, general as opposed to water and sewer, so just focusing on general. This proposed budget or preliminary budget reflects a proposed 4.5% tax increase. And so overall revenue and funding is an increase of about 545,000. Overall expenditures and transfers to reserves increase of approximately 598. And what that results in is a small surplus of $147,000, and that is taxation funding that can be used to supplement the capital program. And just to give you an idea of what a 4.5% tax increase is, so for the average residential household, this year that assessment is just over $921,000, and that's based on the completed roll, which came out in December. And so on average, for that average household, a 4.5% tax increase equates to about $40. And that's just on the value-based taxation. And for an average commercial, the value of an average commercial property this year and on the completed roll is $1.36 million. And a 4.5% tax increase would be about $230. So that just gives you an idea of what that number looks like. Let's see. So revenue, I'll just touch on a few of the revenue items. So as mentioned, this includes a proposed 4.5% tax increase from last year. As part of the taxation calculation, we look at the non-market change, and that's increase in assessments based on mainly construction. And last year we had a benefit of basically 2%. This year it's only 0.5%, so it gives us a bit of a bump of $16,000. That adds to taxation without having a tax increase, so that's embedded in there. Other significant revenue items are the increase in garbage fees, and you're familiar with that because I dealt with that in the previous utility fee budget meeting. And then interest income is another big one this year because of, one benefit of the high inflation is that we get better return on our investments. And so I've been able to increase our interest income quite significantly this year, and that's really helped the budget as well. There's a couple of operating grants. So a new one that got approved mid last year is called the LG CAP. It's a local government climate action program, and the town benefits from $73,000 per year for that. And so I show that as a revenue from our grant funding, but I also transfer that to a reserve because I think most of that or all of that money is going to be used on the capital side, the program side. In the revenue side, there's also, you'll notice a flow, it's a recognition of the flow through funds donations that we get for Gibsons Public Market. That's always in there, but it's revenue neutral for us because we transfer it back or right through to the market. And this budget also includes the use of $142,000 of COVID funding this year. So that's helping keep that tax rate down as well. From an expense side, so overall, the pressures that we're seeing is that 6.8 CPI, that was the percentage as of last year, the annual. I don't know if you heard, but it went down a little bit this morning based on the last month, but it's still pretty significant last year, and so that's impacting any contractual obligations we have in our budget, as well as various services, and the most obvious one is the the garbage services, so we've had to increase the rate for that to help cover the increase in costs. Other areas that where we're seeing a bit of pressure on expenses is our computer services. And, with our new technology environment, we have a lot more costs associated with that. The COVID funding is helping that a bit. We do have a couple of software licensing coming due, and they are 3-year licensing, but I'm loading them into this year because we had the benefit of the COVID funding this year. We also have grants and fees for services. That section, just to remind council that some of those lines in that section, the fees for services are tied to contracts or memorandums of understanding. Other ones are a bit more flexibility, like the grants of assistance line or the individual grants that you provide to individual organizations. One area that the budget does also include is the new building maintenance position that's being proposed, and this is effective July 2023. And this is the additional staffing requirement that was identified as a priority, and council supported this earlier in the year. And so you supported having the additional resources reflected in the budget, so they are included in this budget. And so 2023, that is half-year costs, and then the full year would be reflected in 2024. And I've costed that out in the 5-year plan. And just a couple comments about reserves. So in the fiscal section, transfers to reserves, we have some significant transfers through. So gas tax is a big one, about $270,000. We also transfer reserves for our fleet reserve. This budget includes the 1% replacement for 1% taxation to help cover asset replacement. It's a really small amount, but it's in there, which is good. It also includes transfer of $5,000 for children's infrastructure, playground infrastructure. That was a request that council directed a couple years ago, so that's in there. From an ops point of view, as I mentioned, there's that new LG cap grant of $73,000 that's getting transferred to reserves. In non-election years, which is what we're in this year, we aim to sort of try and spread out the election costs. So we transfer money over each year to aim to build up for our next election. And so this year's transfer is just under $10,000, $909,800. And this budget also includes the 5% taxation that's being collected for policing. So there's a transfer of $185,000 for that. And that was a recommendation or resolution that council made in 2021. In 2022, last year, recognizing the pressures on the community, council chose a one-time reduction of that transfer, and they dropped it down to 2.5%. But I wanted to just clarify that this year we're starting at the 5% because that's the original. But you, of course, have flexibility on all of these things as part of the discussions. And we also get the benefit of a debt that expired last year, so we have a little slightly less debt funding or debt expenses. I did list the preliminary balances as of 2022. Just a reminder, those are preliminary. We're also working on our 2022 audit at the same time as we're working on 2023 budget. And on the final page of my report, there's next steps, and it shows the meetings coming up after this. Before we end the meeting, I'd appreciate just circling back to that, just to remind everybody what the next meetings are and what the next steps are from the budget process. And the attachment has all of the 5-year. I did include a comparison budget to this year's budget to last year's budget, and I also included a comparison of this year's budget to last year's actuals. And again, those actuals may move around a little bit because we're still working on finalizing 2022. And so that's just a really high level. Pass it back to council or committee for discussion. And we do have obviously directors in the gallery for answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is our first shot to really dig into the 2023 budget. Aside from the utility fees that we've already spoken for and set out. So I'm just wondering, I'll start off to see if there are any direct questions. And we will have a general discussion as well with Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. This isn't so much a question. It's the format that we're seeing with the costing and the GL ledger numbering. Is this part of the new accounting system that's being phased in? Okay, thank you. It's I thought the codes at super value for produce were confusing. This is mind-boggling, but thank you.
Councillor DeAndrade.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a clarification. I think every year I ask the same question. The total approved debt I see is 10.631, but what's our maximum capacity? Are we on the 12 or 20 or something between?
Yeah, it's a really, sorry through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, it's a good question, and I should have prepped a bit more for this one. So the debt capacity is based on the debt servicing, so the interest and principal payments, and so that's dependent on the interest rate and the term of the loans. But generally, really broad strokes, our overall debt roughly about $25 million, around there, 23 to 25. But again, it depends. If the debt issues are shorter, then there's less because the debt servicing is higher. And if the interest rate is higher, right, like it is right now, it's also less. So 20 to 25 is a good number to have in your head.
Okay, and we do have, we have the budget. I want to thank our director for all the work that went into preparing this budget too, with collecting the actuals and for 2022, because I know that was a bit of a scramble to get all that work done prior to this meeting, so that council can have all this information in front of us. And part of the process today can be asking questions about certain lines, and as well as the bigger picture of working towards this next budget, which I agreed in preparation for this meeting that starting with looking at a 4.5% increase seems reasonable, but it's something that then council can talk about dropping or raising as the will of the council maybe, and looking at ways or needs that could be needed to do that, be associated with that. Councillor Lumley.
Yeah, I have a couple questions, but one of my questions was whether or not the 4.5 includes, does that include the bump from property tax assessment? Does that 4.5 include that, or that's just 4.5 that we're tacking on to that?
I think the whole budget is predicated on that property, the change in assessments. The entire budget's predicated on that.
Yeah,
Correct.
through you, Mr. Mayor. So I've included the bump that we got, and it was only about $16,000, and so that's already been included in revenue, and we need another 4.5% above that to fund the budget the way it is.
Okay, because my question is because it wasn't included in the regional district's presentation, because their taxes were based on specific items within their budget, and this is a 4.5%. So that's why I asked the question, because of that, but that is included in here. Okay. I mean, it's almost like you could take that off the table, and mentally, I would almost take that off the table, just because we don't have any control over that.
Okay. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, the one bonus is in years where we get a lot of construction, it'll really help boost the taxation we collect, and will take a bit of pressure off any increases. This year it's really minimal, but I wanted to mention it because previous years, the last couple of years, it's been about 75,000, equivalent to a 2%. But this year it's only 0.45. It's really small. And it's just all about timing with assessments.
Okay, and when it comes to, I wanted to just ask too, I didn't get an opportunity to ask our corporate officer before the meeting, but yeah, and our director of finance would know as well, but I don't know if there could be certain lines that might require in-camera discussion if we were to ask about, say, that might have HR circumstances. I don't know if we were certainly like particularly to ask about circumstances last year, for example, why are we under or over on a certain item that might have to do with an employee, or may not, but I don't know. So I want to make sure I'm guiding the conversation the right way. Corporate
You're
officer.
welcome to take a matter in camera to decide whether it should be in camera, and you can always bring it back out if you decide it doesn't need to be in camera. So if you're uncertain and you don't feel like you can actually be frank about your question about whether it should go in camera, you can do that. You can decide in camera whether to keep the matter in camera or bring it out.
Yeah, it's a challenging one, this one, because, you know, we'll look at a budget line and not really know what is in it until we ask, and which could be an in-camera matter and may not be. Councillor Kroll.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Last year, when we were looking for funding for the DPA2 review, the money was taken out of something that had been identified in last year's budget, and at the time it was decided that that money would be recovered this year through taxation to pay back that other budget line. And I don't see anything in here that reflects that. Are you able to clarify that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So thanks for reminding me on that. We did have a surplus in general last year, so we didn't have, and we also haven't had to draw on the funds for DPA 9 yet. 2? Is it 2? Okay.
2 at a time.
Anyway, so we had a surplus, so we would, and so the funding source for that was going to be dipping into the previous surplus balances. We've since added to that surplus a little bit, so in effect, that's taxation money, so I can pull it out and make sure it's taxation funding this year.
Okay, Councillor Kroll.
Just to bring up something which I also don't see in there, because my understanding at the time was that the money was taken out of what had been budgeted for a dog park. And I don't see anything, and the dog park was being pushed a year. And at one of the community engagement sessions, it has raised its little head again. That's why I asked whether the money that was taken from the budget, which I believe it was taken out of what we had allocated last year for the potential park. No.
I'll answer from a governance perspective, because this has come up in an issue at the SCRD too. I mean, I think one important piece is the budget that is, councils and boards go through different iterations of budgets, and the budget that's finally passed is the budget, right? I mean, I hope that's something we can all agree on, and if something that's been integrated to an earlier iteration of the budget doesn't make it into the final, then it's dropped off. I don't think a decision, this may be something that the corporate officer may have to look up and may not be able to do it right away, but I kind of doubt there's a binding decision on an earlier round of the budget that's, and I guess on top of that, I'd say there can't be a binding decision on the next year's budget or the next council. I mean, that's my take as the mayor anyway. Go ahead.
So from my perspective, the current, so last year, council, every year you adopt a 5-year financial plan. And so last year's financial plan included 2023, 24, 25, 26. So until this current year's 5-year financial plan gets adopted, we're still going off of the last 5 years. Generally though, every year things get revised and go on, but technically right now we're still under the last 5-year financial plan, which is why we get to, can pay operations, keep the lights on, pay employees. The capital one though, generally we approach, and this is sort of dipping into the capital question, we generally don't, any projects that's been started, we don't start 2023s until the new year, generally because there is this fluctuation sometimes, but we will have started any of the 2022s carried over, committed. We would, if we're undergoing those, we're already part way, either contract or some sort of, we would keep those going as part of the previous 5-year financial plan.
Okay, so we'll be looking at that, that's March the 7th?
March,
Or
I
is
think
that the
it's
14th?
the 14th, yeah,
Okay.
March 14th, yeah. And that's where a lot of the items that council gets, public engagement with is where they come up. And so we'll have that, yeah. And I meant to mention on the policing, sorry if I may, on the policing topic, I have a report coming on the March 7th Committee of the Whole, just to bring back, here's where we're at with policing, how much money we've set aside, here's some scenarios, that kind of thing. So just keeping that in mind.
Yeah, and I'll say for discussion's sake too, I'm concerned about, and I know a lot of people in town are concerned about the upcoming policing costs. And the previous council was as well, and we've had somewhat of a reprieve with a few more years of not having to pay for our policing costs. But it's almost, I wouldn't say it's almost certain, but it's pretty close to almost certain that we'll get over 5,000 this time. We've already got a couple new developments in town that have come on since the last census, and likely to be more before the next one. And yeah, I'm concerned with I guess a budget strategy that does build a reserve that will probably be burned through very quickly once the policing actually comes on board, but doesn't actually include more taxation to make space, because ultimately we're going to have to, I understand, get up to something like 30%. And if we just stick at 5 and build up a reserve, that's not going to do it. That reserve is going to be gone, and we'll have a reserve to spend in the first year, and it'll be gone, and then we'll have to have a 25% tax increase. So I really think we need to be looking at a priority of increasing that taxation for policing, and it'll build up a reserve, and or at least maybe kind of strategically creating some space there in our taxation for policing, but spending some of those funds on capital projects rather than ongoing projects, so that that space will still be there. So I'm putting that out as a major priority that I think council should be considering here, and we'll look at it more, right? I mean, but we should be thinking of that now. I mean, if we're at 4.5 now and we want to add another 5, for example, or maybe a little less than that, that's going to be a higher taxation increase we're thinking about. Councillor DeAndretti?
Thanks, Mayor. I wonder if there has been any consideration. I understand that increasing sewage and water 5% every year, it's a nice plan. It's what gives us resilience in the long term. But given, that we won't get away with the policing, I wonder if there should be any consideration of extending instead of 5% every year. Maybe we go 3% or 2.5%, and instead of finishing in 5 years or whatever, we finish in 10.
Yeah.
If could have some sort of study in
Yeah,
this.
I hear you. So a longer term plan of incrementally increasing it. Is that what we'll see in March, or?
For the RCMP, yes. So the report I'm going to bring to you on the next committee of the whole is, it'll give you information on where the reserve's at now. It's just under 300,000, but as you mentioned, that's sort of one-time money, and we've got 5% in there. I'm going to give you a scenario of say you wanted to do basically no changes versus say 2% per year, where that gets it, and 5% per year. So the 3 scenarios, just really broad, kind of giving a sense of where you'd land. And it adds up quickly, which is good, but that'll be a bit more detailed from that perspective. And it really is, you're right, building in that, right now we have 5, we need to get up to, closer to 30.
Councillor Lumley?
How about maybe add this to the thing, is incorporate maybe, because the other side of what Councillor DeAndretti is saying is that once we get to the threshold for the sewer and water, I mean, all those tax increases could be going to policing. Maybe that comparison as well, because that's not going to last forever, right? I don't know what the timeline is for the at some point it's self-sustainable. So if we're doing 5% every year, there's going to be a year where it's technically zero built into the plan. So that 5% would just be transitioned into policing, I would imagine. You know what I mean? Just a comparison to see if you stretch it out over time, it might work, but then we're not going to have to pay the policing for what, at least 5 years? The next census, 4.5. So I don't know if that's possible, but even that comparison as well, just saying, hey, if you stretch it out, it's this much. If you don't, it'll pay for itself. Like I'm talking policing will pay for itself. I mean, you might just be trading one for the other, right? And everyone's used to paying 5% a year for water and sewage or whatever the rates were. So that was just one thing. The other thing is, I just wanted to say, I know you brought up policing already, but the other thing I wanted to say was that the community is going to be stuck with a big increase from the regional district, and I don't think they're going to change. And I know you've been pretty vocal about it, and so have I, but we only have one vote at the regional board, and that's not going to dissuade or persuade some of the other directors who, may or may not understand what they're voting on from voting for these extra projects that they're adding that they probably don't have to. I'd really like this council and hopefully with staff to see if what we can do to reduce or to do our best at reduction. Like to say, here's 4.5%. Well, you could say, well, here's 2.5%. And we could kind of almost set an example by saying that, it doesn't have to be status quo. We don't have to keep spending money. We can, if we're going to increase policing, we can cut some things in other areas and we don't have to cripple, people in the community that might be under some financial pressure. I think I'd like to do that. I do have some things, I'll let someone else speak, but I do have I have some ideas, and if I could, just as a general sense, just back to the accounting department, is if there are some ways that, we could go a little deeper in to find some areas where it could be 0.5% here, 0.5% there, I'd be interested in looking into those things. That's all.
Okay, yeah,
I have some ideas, sorry, but I do.
appreciate you bringing that up as kind of a general interest discussion for council right now, and I certainly have some thoughts on that. I should probably follow up directly on the SCRD piece because I was just at a SCRD budget workshop this morning. It's certainly true that some of the decisions or even the discussions going into round two are more discretionary pieces of the budget that directors have been supporting, the majority have been supporting so far. But it's also true that by far the highest expenses are more non-discretionary pieces and things that are already integrated into the SCRD budget that are carried forward from previous years. We started out with an average 9% increase on properties in Gibsons. The budget started that way before at the SCRD before we even because that was previous commitments to wages that were committed the prior year, and maybe they were a 0.8 or something or less than that if it was made halfway through the year, and now the rest of the half is catching up. So then you end up eating that when the budget comes around again. So that's those commitments were already made, and then there's a lot of asset management. It's the SCRD they've got a lot of facilities, and they're doing their due diligence on asset management. And I do think kudos to staff at the town and previous councils. Really did a lot of great work on asset management prior to a lot of other local governments in at least BC, probably Canada. We've integrated those 5% increases into our budget, whereas it's still a game of playing catch up at a lot of other places, including the SCRD, and heavily behind the eight ball right now in trying to catch up on recreation facilities for sure. And that's a big reason for those significant tax increases. And we're looking at, I think I just sent an update this morning to our director, which is a 385,000 tax increase to the town of Gibsons from the SCRD. So that's gonna, I mean, we can't kind of estimate how that'll come out, but maybe it's probably gonna be like 15%. I think it's 12 to 13 now. I don't know if yeah. Just under 13, okay, yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, on one hand, we're under those pressures. I think another, in fairness, another way to look at it is like we're about to take on policing. There are different services or things that different municipalities in BC either have to look after themselves or they have the regional district looked after. And recreation is one that our regional district looks after for us and pools resources to hopefully get a better bang for the buck. But and that's some of the, yeah, I see some facial expressions around the board, but hopefully get a bang for the buck. It often doesn't feel that way. But there are a lot of facilities there that we're having to pay for the asset management to, and rather than do it straight from a municipality, it's being done through the SCRD budget. And they're all, a lot of them are needing care at the same time, going back to that recreation referendum that happened. Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. To Councillor Lumley's point, I certainly hear what he's saying. I have grave concern. We clawed back our budget 2 years because of COVID. Our staff have been working hard to try and keep us ahead of the eight ball. But, going back to 2019, and we asked the Director of Infrastructure at that time what he needed to maintain the status quo, and that was 10% at that time. And various departments have not really had the full support financially to do what needs to be done to keep us ahead of the being caught between a rock and a hard place. Just because the regional district, I appreciate they're sort of clobbering us with a potential increase, but I think, in all good conscience, I would find it difficult to undermine what we're trying to do because of what they're doing to us. I sort of feel like we're, putting ourselves in jeopardy by cutting back and not properly funding things that should be supported. If it's a total discretionary item, then, I'm willing to look at it. But, when it comes to certain levels of, what we need to be doing, because, I think one year we were over 5% and we cut back to 2.7, and another year we were, we cut back. To the policing issue, we cut back to 5% for 2 years. We know we're going to pay the piper soon enough. And I would rather pay the piper with today's dollars than be scrambling trying to find where we're going to get, inflated dollars in the future.
It's a matter of setting priorities and determining what is discretionary and what we really need to do. And we definitely can't sacrifice our own asset management for the SCRD's asset management. Councillor Crowley.
And just in a follow-up, we know how generally people look at the budget. They don't show up to complain or comment until they get their tax bill, and then it's, it becomes the orchestra of scorched cats. But I think, we could communicate to our residents, the potential impact of what's coming from the regional district and get sort of a little more pushback. We only have one vote at the board table, but if their switchboard lights up like a Christmas tree with Gibsons residents screaming at them, they might listen.
Well, some of the other areas are looking at larger increases than we are, and they seem to be, the directors anyway, feel justified. Councillor Lumley.
Yeah, just to clarify, I'm not saying let's cut the budget and drive the town into the ground. I'm saying, let's be creative, or let's maybe try and come up with some creative solutions. And I'll give you like one example. I know it's small, but I mean, even for grants of and assistance, like people didn't even apply for it. And then we sat here trying to come up with ways to spend it. Well, maybe that's just not what we should be doing, that's just like one small example. It's like, just because you've done it in the past doesn't mean you have to do it every year. I'm just saying, if we could find some creative ways to maybe save some money, that'd be beneficial for everybody.
I agree with that, absolutely, as a place to look at. I really think the challenge with policing, and we see how big a deal policing is on budgets that actually have policing in them. That, like Surrey's, what was the Surrey increase announced a day ago? 20% taxation increase, largely due to policing, and that's I mean they're fiddling around with what kind of system they want. That's a big reason for it, but it's still, they already have policing in their budget, and that's just the increase. And they've had it for many years. It's not like integrating it, whether it's RCMP or the Surrey Police Force. And I think it really it needs to make us to look at what our core, and I think this is to Councillor Kroll's point, what our core services are and what we really need to do, and what citizens in the municipality really expect from us. And we heard that a bit at our public engagement session, and we see it in our survey. I've saw our first survey results were just given to me in infrastructure, people's top concerns, and I think we saw that in the initial run too. But it's complete, and I'll share that with council soon. So yeah, a logical place to look, I think, is that grants donations area. This isn't an area that all municipalities fund. It may, some of these amounts may be small, but it definitely adds up when you look at the bottom line. And I do hope there are ways that I definitely feel there are ways that we can support groups in our municipality to get other funding that might not be taxpayer funding that we might need to be looking at integrating into the policing budget and our growing budget. So I support Councillor Lumley's suggestion that this is a place where we look. And I mean, I guess something too is I've seen historically, and maybe that's why we're not getting the level of interest we used to, is that a lot of the groups now have line items. So a lot of the groups that used to apply for grants of assistance 6 years ago or so, when I was on council last, now I see them, they've all got line items. So we're kind of doubling up in budget that way. So I think that's a good suggestion to take a closer look at those, which is a difficult conversation to have, but yeah, CAO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a suggestion as well, as you were talking, thinking about our capital program. I know we're going to be talking about that, but one of the things we're finding is our limited ability to do all the work, just in general, and other things that come up. Would be to the extent that we need to raise taxes for projects, we want to make sure we're actually going to do those projects, and just being mindful of what our capacity is to do a lot of this work, because otherwise you end up with just transferring that money to the following year, and sort of that you raise unnecessarily, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's going on strongly at the SCRD too, but it's like hanging over from the pandemic, where projects were approved and then because of staffing shortages, they couldn't be completed. So it's the relationship between projects and staffing is important. Councillor Lumley.
So there was a surplus at the end of last year. So I'm going to keep harping on this point because it's the money, the expenses come in, the money will get spent. We know that already. The budget doesn't specifically pigeonhole specific amounts to things, and they don't go up or down, because we know that too. So we had a surplus last year. So all I'm saying is, with the help of our crack accounting staff, right, come up with some things that can physically and visually, the people in our community can say, wow, you know what? These guys are really trying to help us. I mean, we've got other increases elsewhere, because we have a surplus. And just one example, right, is the fact that you still had a surplus and your legal fees were like $111,000, like over what you had budgeted. And we still had a surplus. So if we budget $45,000, but we paid $156,000, or what I forget, I'm not on the line anymore. But I'm just saying that you can translate some of those savings, hopefully, into a reduction of your tax increase and not spend that money. Because if we didn't, then you'd have even a larger surplus, which meant part of your tax increase is just ending up on your bottom line. The money's going to get spent anyway. I don't know if that makes any sense to anyone, but it's not even about like individual numbers. Like, we could bore everyone to tears and go through line by line. All I'm saying is, philosophically, if we can find some differences in the current budget against the actuals from last year and have a reduction in taxes, or at least not raise taxes as crazily as maybe surrounding communities are, it's a win for us. That's all. I think we could just strive for that. So, anyway.
I'll go to the director first, and then
So on, through you, Mr. Mayor, so picking up on the thread that Councillor Lumley's talking about. And so part of the, there's a couple areas I think that might help council, is that as part of the surplus, we do transfer money into reserves, right? And so things like, expenses in the 2023 budget that are tied to something like contracted services, say crack sealing or line painting, that kind of thing, I could transfer funds from a reserve to cover that and then not use taxation funding. And that would be, it's a one-time event for 2023, but again, it gets at this year's taxation, and it's using last year's surplus because it's already gone in, so I can pull that back out. And those ones, because they're, I mean, the line painting not so much, but other ones a bit more, not discretionary, but those are sometimes the ones that we have a surplus, because obviously mostly our expenses, last year was mostly our expenses. I'm going back into 2022 land right now. We had some increases in revenue. It was, interest income was very big compared to budget, and we also had that $130,000 grant from the province that they weren't planning for, and that was a big difference for last year. We also had some areas where we didn't have expenses, so say we had planned for, say, travel, but training didn't happen, so we didn't do the travel, that kind of thing. That's not something you want to adjust because you want to make sure those funds are there for future. But in terms, well, ideally, in terms of, I guess what I'm getting at is one-time transfers to reserves for this year, knowing it's not going to solve the problem for 5 years, is an option. The other reserve that we've got is COVID funding, and I've got a bit of a buffer left over of about 50 grand in there, and that's for just to add us a bit of a contingency in case our ops or more so capital goes over. That's a bit of an option that council could look at. And the final comment I wanted to make was the surplus that I was looking for when I was trying to give a budget that council would be comfortable with. I wanted to make sure that the items that were in 2023 that had been highlighted as priorities or significant items or committed that had taxation funding were funded, and one of them is the Healthy Harbors, so we had to have 25,000 in there. The other one is the OCP, the first phase of that, and it was budgeted, I think, at 100 grand, 105, and that was going to be fully taxation funded. So I thought, okay, I want to aim for this year's surplus to make sure at least I have those two covered. So you have that from a taxation point of view, and that's why the 147 kind of came about. If that helps.
Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor White. I certainly agree that if we can find things where we can, reduce the tax burden to the community, I'm all for it. Not to, I wasn't sort of shooting down Councillor Lumley's idea. His professional background is that of a bean counter, so I really do appreciate his eagle eye looking over these figures. But I think there are things in there that we could probably, there may be a few people that aren't too happy with us, but at the end of the day, if it's a less tax impact to, the community, I'm all for it.
Councillor Lumley, I saw first.
Sure, it's just like that movie Dave. I don't know, have you seen that movie Dave? Where he invites his accountant friend. You guys have seen it, right?
Is your accounting expertise coming to the fore here?
Okay, you should watch it because the guy, he's the doppelganger of the president, and you've seen it. Okay, so anyway, the president has a stroke and he's incapacitated, like he's on life support. So they bring this guy in to act like the president because they want to get some things done. But he brings this buddy accountant in, and they go over the budget. And it was funny because and I'm sure there's things here which you've already alluded to, so you reminded me of that movie, where on their budget,
Incapacitated one or the account?
it's like on their budget, they have like $20 million set aside to congratulate people for buying American-made cars, or to encourage them, but they've already bought the cars, and the guy was going, but they've already bought the cars. So they just start scratching things off. Anyway, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So, way to go. And you spent like 5 seconds on it. So it's gonna happen.
Well, the equivalent of that seems to be the mayor's challenge of $1,000, so we can scratch that off. I'm good with that, but that's only $1,000, so. Councillor DeAndrade.
This regards the announcement from the province for $1 billion. Is there any, I was just wondering if there's any project that we could, well, first of all, do we have an idea? I know it's going to be proportional probably to population or something. I think it's population. So do we have an idea how much kind of a share we're going to get? And if there's anything here that could wait a few months, I guess, until we get?
Go ahead.
So at this point, we don't have an idea of the money yet. There's lots of speculation as how it will be, but it'll be a, formula based on population. So, and we're going to be receiving that notification by the end of March, and that's going to be coming at the really good timing of the capital program. And my thoughts is that this is really operations core services. It's one-time money, and it's probably going to be quite significant. And so, to me, that is a really good opportunity to look at some really high priority, high value capital items that we could use that money instead. And that includes water and sewer. Like we have a couple of sewer projects that we're potentially funding by debt. And so looking at that really, so to me, that's really capital discussion money because of the size. Doesn't mean that you couldn't use some for ops as well, but by the time that information is known, it's going to be around the mid to late March, and we'll be bringing a capital budget to council at that time.
Councillor DeAndrade.
And going on the point of coming with something creative that we can see, okay, if we cut here and extend the water sewage, or we increase the 5%, is there anything as well as the debt? Because I know right now we are in the 10,000, we may get more, but I don't remember, I don't even know if you provide the figures of when these debts will be over. I mean, if there's a significant percentage that we can put in this scenario as well, and just to balance.
Go ahead.
So when I look at the 5-year, so the document, the version that I gave you this year, forecasts out for the full 5 years. I look at the general, and this is only general, we have water and sewer debt as well. This looks at the general debt and takes into account any issues that are expiring. We just had one expire last year, and that gave us a benefit of $54,000 that we were spending last year, don't have to do this year. And so that's a benefit. There wasn't any more in the next 4 years that are coming out of general, but we do look at that in the 5 year for sure. Yeah. the rates though, anything rolling over as well. We're lucky most aren't coming up for reissue right now as well, because they're waiting for the rates to go back down.
Councillor Lumley, do you have any other suggestions?
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think we should borrow as least as we can this year on anything, as if whatever we don't need to, because I brought this point up because the regional district's borrowing quite a bit, and the rates are very high right now, right? Like 4 point some, and you'll see on ours that some of our rates where you can get 1.7 or 1.75, so, and the economy is starting to come down a bit, calm down. People are starting to spend a bit more, and so there's good signs ahead. But that would be very, astute of us not to be borrowing a bunch of money at this time.
Okay. I might actually have some questions on the actuals versus coming the next year, but that some of them may relate to staffing, so I'd like to save that for when we can go in camera. Does that, are people ready for that at this meeting, or, yeah, but not quite. Yeah, and I wonder what kind of, now, I just want to go back to Councillor Lumley, because you are suggesting some direction here to take. And I'm, generally interested in that too, to see what kind of savings maybe we could possibly come up with. And I don't know if I agree with looking at a 0% tax increase though, but like I said at the beginning, I feel like we need to start building in more room for policing. And I know we're not going to look at that quite yet. We need to look at that at a future meeting, but I think it probably would be helpful for us right now to just look at some scenarios of how could we make some space for that? Because I personally, I don't think we can do a 10% tax increase or something with what we're already looking at from the SCRD, and who knows from the province. And that's another frustration is the province has their so-called school tax, which just goes into general revenue, and that's been increasing a lot in recent years, and we have to collect it, so we get the heat for it, which I think our staff knows. They get phone calls about it all the time, probably. Director?
I don't know if committee has an idea of where, outside of policing, where you're comfortable with, that's helpful, because then I can go back and look at areas of where we could be either likely pulling in reserves, frankly, because there isn't a lot of room, unless there's some lines that are a bit discretionary, but there's really, the operation budget is core operations. I could go back and are we sure that we're going to be able to get this contracted services done, or we could fund it from reserves, depending on what it is. And so it would be helpful if you're thinking, okay, maybe, I don't know, a 2 as opposed to a 4.5, that kind of thing. Just gives me an idea of scope in terms of what dollar we're talking for. And a 1% is equivalent to about $37,000.
Okay, that might be good to talk about in the in-camera portion, I'm thinking. Councillor Lumley, though, he also raised the grants portion, and I'm wondering if maybe we could consider what would it look like if there was a 20% decrease or something to this, to find some funds. Is that the kind of thing you were considering, Councillor Lumley, and is that what would that be helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Thompson.
I just want to say I appreciate the 4 years you all have had on this budget. Great suggestions. I just want to make sure I have one thing clear, though. Councillor Lumley, were you saying in regards to the grants, is that where we have funds currently allocated in the budget, that grants would relieve that allocation into surplus?
Go ahead.
No, there's the line item of grants and assistance.
Okay.
Last year, there people didn't apply for it. So like you do, so the people apply for $1,500 and they submit an application to the town, and it was under-applied for, it was underutilized. I'm just saying, you know, and then we bent over backwards trying to find people to give this money to.
I see what
So
you're saying, yeah.
I kind of want to take the opposite approach this year. Like if people don't apply for it, then it just doesn't get given out, which, you know, could save some money. I'm just, you know, but again, my idea about the budget is it's theoretical because if you can, my legal fees was my example. You can budget all you want, which is included in your tax increase, right? Every item's included to make up this number, but you're gonna spend whatever you have to spend. So at the end of the day, you spend less here, you spend more here, because I don't know, like I said, you could spend all day going, what's this vehicle chargeback? Like, why don't we get rid of that? Like, we're losing money, like, you know what I mean? It's really not, I don't think that's our job, but Lorraine and her staff know the numbers way better than we do. So mine was just like, hey, maybe we can come up with some stuff. We can decrease and I kind of have policing, off to the side. I wasn't including policing in this, but just, you know, come back with some suggestions, you know, like transfers from reserves, right? That 37,000 transfer from reserves, that's 1%. There you go. Like the increase in the legal fees, that's 3% of our budget. Like that was 3%. Like the increase from our budget amount to what we spent on legal fees. Maybe we budget less in legal fees and spend less in legal fees. And you know what? The budget will still be lower, you know, the increase. That's all I was, you know, I hope I'm making sense, probably. I hope so.
Yeah, fair, and legal fees are sometimes something you can't control, but they sometimes are too. You could, I mean, we as an organization can be mindful of the fact we've got a lower budget for legal fees and be a little more discretionary about it, but there are times when unexpected legal costs come up as well, which we'd have to find a way to pay for if that were the case, yeah. Do we need any more, like, more solid direction of that, though? Like, I feel like maybe we do.
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
So I can, you know, at this point, it would be helpful to know sort of what are you thinking, a reduction of 1%, 2%, 3%? And I had mentioned before, I've got some reserves for COVID. I had a bit of a buffer. We have endless items in our ops budget that are qualify for that grant because there's so much technology in our days these days. And so one option is I could pull in a bit more COVID funding. It reduces the contingency, but that's an option. Another is reserves that we had from last year that for ops we didn't use for things like I said, crack sealing or road patching. I could pull in a bit of those reserves. That's the easiest without having to go into areas of like legal, that type of thing, as makes me a little nervous, just because legal, it's very much out of our control. Some of it is, but most of it, and it swings so much. And Councillor Lumley's right. We put a budget in, say 60,000 for legal. I remember one year our legal was like 130, and that's just, it is what it is. But we don't know until the end of the year, and hopefully the overages balance out the underages. But I think from a scope point of view, if I get a sense of how much you're looking for, then that would be helpful.
2%? Could we try to find that? I don't know.
So, sorry, find 2 or aim for 2?
In those,
So right now it's at 4.5, so you want to go down maybe to 2.5?
Yeah, whether it be the COVID or reserves, that's one piece. But yeah, I want to come back to the other piece that Councillor Lumley raised too. I don't know, I'm looking at others here. Yeah. Just to see what it looks like, and it might not look good to us. Yeah, and we'd have to see, you know, what is left in those accounts and whether it's a good, you know, it's something we're comfortable with. Councillor DeAndrade?
I was just wondering, since we are picking a number, why don't we do between 3 and 2, so at least if we can better understand what's, if in case the SRD come and escalate like crazy, I don't know.
Okay, I don't know.
At least we don't have to
Still looking
go
for more
back.
discussion here. between 3 and 2 rather
Yeah,
than
like
2?
worst scenario 3, better scenario 2. And then if we don't need
Okay.
1% is easy to pick. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just writing something down here. Okay, so like, would a motion to say that council asks staff to prepare for scenarios for reductions of 2% and 3% covered by the COVID funds? I don't know what the proper name is, reserves, or just that, and okay, open-ended, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, it's much more flexible if you just, either you could phrase it like aim for an X% tax increase, knowing that we've got, it's almost easier as opposed to reducing from what we've got right now.
okay,
And then not, unless you have something very specific in the lines that you want us to address, like, grants of assistance reduces or others, or if it's from reserves, and leave that open, and there's
Yeah.
various pots of reserves I can draw from.
I mean, I'd still like to talk about the grants of reserves, grants a bit separately. But if we're looking for up to 3, then I would, at 1.5, ask for 1.5, see a scenario with a 1.5 increase. Does that work for people? And then you can always roll back to 2 if that's, yeah. Okay, does somebody want to make that as a recommendation? Councillor DeAndrade, seconded by Councillor Thompson. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion carries. Yeah, I was, with grants of assistance, yeah, I'm concerned that it just keeps growing and growing at a time when, or it has been at a time when we have these other pressures, including policing. And in this, I'd like to see what it might look like if we, as a scenario again, if we looked at like a 20% decrease to the entire budget, not to the just the one line, but the entire budget. And I know that's more discretionary, but I think maybe we could help guide that by councillors sending in some suggestions on how we might do that. Councillor DeAndrade?
Yeah, and if we think about it, the Gibson Society used to be in this grant, so they would take at least 1,000, 1,500, the hospice as well, so now they are not. So just there is kind of 20%, right, that we already reduced because now they are line items.
Yeah, though I'm talking about the whole section which they are a part of, 12.12-4.
Sorry. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, with 20% of 20,000 is easy, but looking to see
Sorry.
for the whole area, to maybe try to get more of a 1% increase or 1% saved or so. Yeah, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in that section, and this is something I want to improve in future, that section, I just want to remind council that there are some lines that are fees for services. And so they're
Right.
tied to a
Contracts or MOUs and things, yeah.
So the examples of that is Scredo, and then the larger items, Scredo, the youth outreach worker, and the visitor information services. Those are tied contractually. The other items, like the individual items, like, Jazz Society, track, that kind of thing, those are just by council resolution. The other area that is important to note is the Gibsons public market flow through. So that's really just matching the funds on the revenue side. So those ones have no effect. So basically take that out of the equation because there's a funding source that counters it. And so really in this area, without changing a contract, so Scredo has a contract, like I said, youth outreach worker has an MOU, visitor information services is contract or MOU, I think it's contract. I did include $5,700 for the House Sound Marine Stewardship. So that reflects the $4,500 for the forum that's going to be underway that council's hosting. And then $1,200 is a commitment that council made previously. But the other items are available to be a bit more flexible on that. Yeah. And one more thing if I could. The community festival, that $15,000, that used to be the Sea Cavalcade line. And that was for the fireworks. And so couple years ago, when Sea Cavalcade with COVID, a lot of changes through COVID, direction was to change that to more of a community festival, so it wasn't tied to Sea Cavalcade in case that wasn't able to be resurrected. So that's what that line is for. And the music in the landing, that's over in the parks section. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Councillor Kroll.
With respect to Scredo, it's come up a couple of times that they were supposed to be sort of reporting back to us on what they're doing, where they are, what's happening. I haven't seen them at that table for some time.
I'm going to answer this because I'm concerned. Is this a contractual issue really? Like, and I know the SCRD has made some decisions regarding this and waiting for their report from Scredo, which I was reminded of earlier today. But yeah, I don't know if this is something we should be talking about in public, if it's a contractual issue. And I was actually thinking about putting it on an in-camera, maybe even tonight.
Through you, Mr. Mayor,
CAO.
if I may, I think we should like to suggest that we start there.
Okay.
Conversation, then as
Yeah.
corporate officer mentioned, we might need to bring something out, but
Yeah, and maybe even do it right now in committee, if we are going to go in camera, corporate officer.
Whenever you are ready, it's actually section 90, sub 1, sub N, which says that you may go in camera for the consideration of whether a council meeting should be closed under a provision of this section or subsection 2.
Okay, well, since you freshly read that out and I don't have to remember it and repeat it, let's just go in camera based on that. Councillor Kroll, seconded by Councillor DeAndrade. All those in favor? The motion carries. So we'll talk about that issue first, and I've got some other potential staffing ones to ask about too.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, for in-camera, generally it's limited to just core staff.
Right, yeah,
And so.
yeah, and
Guys get off the hook and, yeah. 'Cause some
thanks
of
for
the-
reminding me. I was just going to fly right into it, and
Some of the,
yeah.